and today we bring you an updated story about a community hospital and its development of a new leadership program. Tonya Myers, our field reporter, encountered this remarkable story 1 year ago. Complacent Memorial Hospital identified a need for future nurse leaders. This need focused internally, specifically targeting nurse managers due to the aging population of the workforce. The hospital administrator who developed this program chose Kurt Lewin's theory of plan change as a resource to guide this monumental change, as he was the pioneer of group dynamics and laid the foundation for organizational development. Lewin's work, though completed in the early 20th century, is still supported today by many scholars. Taking a look back, Lewin began his work in psychology after being discharged from the German army in World War I. It was then that he began working with two of the most influential people in his life, Max Wertheimer and Wolfgang Kohler, both founders of Gestalt psychology. Gestalt psychology looks at the whole rather than focusing on individual parts. Similar to the expression by Aristotle, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Lewin used Gestalt psychology as a foundation for developing his field theory studies that began in the 1920s. His main purpose was to evaluate individual behavior. Lewin continued his studies in Germany, but as Nazism grew, he, Wertheimer, and Kohler fled to the United States. It was then that Lewin's objectives changed from that of his laboratory-based colleagues, and he focused on the need to understand the human behavior of change, later focusing on changing of group behavior. This led to an abundant number of social group experiments, and during World War II, Lewin concentrated on phenomenal research in group dynamics and change programs. Before his death in 1947, he documented selected papers on the creation of permanent changes, and in these, he wrote of a three-step process of change. Today we revisit Complacent Memorial Hospital, and we explore how this theory influenced their program as I sit down for an exclusive interview with their administrator and CNO. But first, we turn to Tonya for concepts of review of Kurt Lewin's theory of plan change. Tonya, are you there?
Thanks, Brooke. It is well known that change is often difficult and not always guaranteed to last. Kurt Lewin postulated that permanent and effective change had to be planned. He believed that in order to change the perceptions of an individual, you needed to change the perceptions of the group to which that individual belonged. Lewin believed that a field or environment is always in a state of quasi-equilibrium, balance between the forces for change and the forces against change. The first step in Kurt Lewin's theory of plan change is called unfreezing. In this step, the need for change is identified, as well as the driving forces that promote change and the restraining forces that resist change. In the second step, which he called moving, the driving forces overcome the restraining forces and move the field or environment to the desired change. The final step, which is called freezing, occurs when the change to the field or the environment becomes permanent. Here, Theory 1's use has learned that Complacent Hospital, a small 200-bed community hospital in anywhere in Kentucky, has successfully implemented Lewin's theory of plan change. It all started 1 year ago when the hospital leaders recognized that the hospital would be facing a shortage of nurse managers due to the retirement of the current managers within the next 10 to 15 years. This realization created an urgency to change the current status quo and create a culture that would promote the internal development of nursing leaders. In keeping with Leuven's theory of planned change, hospital leadership, including the stakeholders, first identified the driving forces for the desired change. These included the imminent retirement of the nurse managers, as well as the higher cost of recruiting from outside the hospital and the increased competition from larger hospitals. Complacent Hospital CNO Anita Change then held town hall meetings with the staff nurses to make them aware of the hospital's future management needs. The meetings also helped to identify some of the restraining forces against the change. During the meeting, nurse leaderships identified two dominant restraining forces. First, there was lack of motivation on the part of staff nurses to take on the increased responsibilities associated with nurse management roles. Second, there was concern on the part of staff nurses that the salaries offered to nurse managers here at Complacent Hospital was not as competitive as those salaries offered by larger hospitals. The third restraining force was identified later on, and it actually came from non-nursing departments. These departments felt that all the effort to develop leaders was only focused on the nursing departments. They felt their departments were being neglected in the process of developing leaders. Once the driving and restraining forces have been successfully identified, the hospital leadership recognized that the next step in Leuven's theory of planned change would be to unfreeze the status quo and by strengthening driving forces and reducing the restraining forces. In order to strengthen the driving forces, the hospital leadership appointed a team of collaborators. The job of these collaborators was to communicate the urgent need for the leadership development program. These collaborators were also responsible for emphasizing the benefits of recruiting from within the hospital, which included reduced costs and increased loyalty. The administrators then took several steps to reduce the restraining forces. First, they put support structures in place for nursing managers in order to help them reduce their workload. Second, they reassured the non-nursing departments that although the leadership development program was being piloted in the nursing department, that the program would soon be implemented in their departments as well. Third, nurse leaders began discussion with the Human Resources Department to work on increasing the salaries of nurse managers to make them more competitive with larger hospitals. Over time, Complacent Hospital has been successful in unfreezing the status quo and has moved from a hospital with no thought of leadership development to a hospital environment where leadership development is strongly emphasized. 1 year later, the Nursing Leadership Development Program has successfully enrolled 15 nurses. The hospital leaders continue to work on making the changes permanent or refreezing this new status quo. This is being done by initiating leadership development programs in other departments and by providing incentives and reminders to staff to pursue leadership development in their respective departments. And now, back to Brooke.
Welcome back, and good evening. Here to summarize and answer questions of Leuven's theory of planned change at Complacent Memorial Hospital is CNO Anita Change. Welcome, Anita.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here to share more about how we were able to make such great changes using a theoretical framework of Leuven's theory of planned change at Complacent Memorial Hospital. This middle range theory is easily applied and expanded to various areas in healthcare and beyond. We actually just heard about a similar structure being used at a rehab facility in Ohio, so that's really exciting for us here at CMH.
That sounds wonderful. So can you tell us why you chose this theoretical framework for your particular change?
Yes, we had many reasons for choosing this theory, including its clarity, its conciseness, and really an overall ease of understanding, as well as we had several examples where previous users had implemented change using this theory as a framework and had great success. A clear description of the concepts include a three-phase model of planned change and driving forces overcoming restraining forces. We were able to just show that part to stakeholders in town hall meetings, and from there showed them a framework we would use as a guide. And this figure that we have here is what we actually showed our end users.
So this is a wonderful figure that you've created here, and I can see that we're looking at the three phases of change and the attitudes that must occur before the new change is set.
Yes, we have here up in the corner an example of how equilibrium is really a constant cycle and a goal that we're trying to achieve. And then I've brought out the three-step model I talked about, and we'll go through each one of those steps. And the first one, the unfreezing, really starts with identifying the problem. And our problem was that we weren't going to have frontline nurse leaders in the very near future. We used this opportunity to hold meetings and analyze our group. Really, how were they feeling about this, and if they were even aware of our problem. Then we identified forces, and by doing that, we could really tell how we were going to be able to implement a new program. So from the unfreezing, really unsettling our current equilibrium, we started in the movement phase. And here, those driving forces began to overcome the restraining forces. In our example, our driving forces were basically our need for change. We had retiring nurse leaders, and we needed to get internal nurses to become new leaders in the nurse management role, but restraining forces were numerous too. So once our driving forces overcame restraining forces and we created a long-term leadership program, we had movement. Obviously, our goal is to freeze a new permanent change. And by doing that, we had many nurses enrolled in the program. We overcame all of those restraining forces and moved to a new state of quasi-equilibrium. Now, I say quasi-equilibrium here because the change is constant, so we want a permanent change, but we want to be open to new changes in the future as well.
Absolutely. So can you tell us about some of the other examples and expand on possible other ways to apply this theory?
Sure. In doing research on how useful the Lewin's theory of planned change would be, I came across major changes that had used this theory and found a few interesting examples I'll share with you in healthcare administration. Using these examples, we explored it and applied it to our current issue. In 2010, there was a group of nurse administrators at a private liberal arts professional studies college that needed to develop a future state for their School of Nursing Administration structure. Schreiner and colleagues used Lewin's theory of planned change as the template for an organizational overhaul and the hierarchy of nursing faculty, and a distribution of the workload there.
Oh, I can see that's very similar, but that's a completely different setting.
Exactly. I thought it was very applicable. Another example is the use of theory in nursing practice to ensure safer patient care with a new standardized checklist. In 2009 at Mission Hospital in California, they introduced an effort to reduce potential patient care errors, and the hospital's quality council used this model to institute a practice change and change the standard of care regarding communication from an SBAR format to an SBAP format. You can see the theory of planned change was applicable to this hospital's organization as well. So it was a simple choice because of how appropriate it was to our needs here at CMH.
Absolutely. So if other organizations wanted to use this framework, what would some precautions or some criticisms be that they should consider before making a decision?
Well, there are a few criticisms of Lewin's theory of planned change. Most of those come from the fact that this idea that it's a top-down approach. So it's an autocratic and authority-driven. From the end users, it seems like something that's being pushed on them.
Yes, and nobody likes that.
No. So our process, when we used our process, we chose to focus on the desired future state and create a long-term leadership program that would help grow our leaders from our internal force. Another criticism is that using and implementing a framework like this in an organization requires a lot of time.
It does seem like this would be a very lengthy process.
Well, critics of Lewin's theory of plan change in practice say that most often that people cannot afford the luxury of the numerous steps in this process, and fortunately, with a change such as this and growing new internal forces and internal leaders, we were able to apply the necessary steps over time, and we're not rushed into this decision. And you can see we've already made progress and improved the culture here.
Well, your purpose for choosing this framework really helped your organization achieve a new level, and it really helped guide your process in beginning a change. So this was all very interesting and very helpful, and we thank you so much for your time today and the work that you did.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, and I hope that this will inspire others to use this theoretical framework to make change in their organization as well.
Absolutely. Thank you again. In the words of Kurt Lewin, there is nothing so practical as a good theory. That's all for tonight, and thank you for joining us. I'm Brooke Vaughn. Join us next time when we discuss more useful theories in practice. Sleep tight, America.